Guy Adams here, President and CEO of Christian Appalachian Project, CAP. I'm so glad that you're joining us for this documentary film on Appalachia, Central Appalachia, even more specifically Eastern Kentucky, and how CAP was formed and is addressing through the decades the challenges of folks living in need.
So we're sitting here in Appalachia. Where and what is that? Look around. The trees, the mountains, the rocks. Listen to the wind as it rustles along. Feel the spirit of the forest. Breathe. This is Appalachia. The people, me, you, we're all a part of this. We feel it, we hear it, we see it, we sense it. Appalachia, the land that we're standing or sitting on now, the feet that have walked across, the stories, the history. Who walked here first? 1,000 years ago? The ones who were here first, the first peoples, it was their land. And then we have the Europeans, my ancestors. I have Cherokee ancestors. You probably do too. English, Irish, Scottish, German, African, all the ones that have passed, the ones who have stayed, the ones who have lived and the ones who are buried, their spirits. It's Appalachia. And the things that are unknown, the mysteries, the carvings on some of the trees. Where'd that come from? Who did that? The struggles. And yet it all comes back to the stories. And you sitting here, and what you see and hear, and you can just close your eyes and become. That's Appalachia. I'm Appalachia. We're one. Let's hold on to that, and let's remember those who came before, and let's also remember to preserve it for those who come after.
When I say Appalachia, what do I mean? As we move in, let's say the mountains of North Carolina or the mountains of West Virginia, and we're coming in closer and closer, it can never be held in anything. I'm thinking of the beauty of the places I've gone, the beauty of the people I've met. Until somebody is driven on, let's say, the Blue Ridge Parkway, or let's say that they've gone up to Pine Mountain Settlement School, and they've seen these both incredible places and vistas and views, and they've got a chance to walk out and maybe see a bear, or gone fishing, for the resources of Appalachia are incredible. There's a danger in trying to peg Appalachia by its set of circumstances that have put it at disadvantage. And instead, how do we see that as part of this quilt of the whole, this weaving that people are always engaged in making with it? And when you find those things and you move beyond that quick one shot then that's when the love of a place starts happening, right? That's when the connection with places start happening with it too. But to be able to see a place as whole across time and across class and across difference, that's a work of a lifetime. It's a beautiful work to do too. But the more pieces we know, even though we can never know it all, the more pieces we know, more life our own hearts will have, because we'll be able to see other people's hearts just as well. Appalachia has always been here. It was here for the Native peoples. It was here before the Native peoples. There was a time though in the 1700s when the Scots-Irish, and the Scots-Irish were a wide variety of people. Presbyterian, people from Scotland, people from Ireland, people from Wales, and they were seeking opportunity too. And what they did is they came into places like Pennsylvania and Philadelphia, and all the land was taken. And so they would spill over.
First thing to remember is that there actually were Native Americans that were here before, of course, Europeans arrived. And a lot of the Europeans that came into Appalachia were Scotch-Irish descent. They'd come from the Celtic regions of the British Isles. They came into Appalachia, into eastern Kentucky and those areas, kind of looking to make their way. Some of the first people in were actually long hunters. They weren't settlers. And so, of course, long hunters came into Appalachia for the furs and pelts and the game, for the eastern market, and for also to send the pelts back to Europe. And it was more to make money. And when they traveled back, they ended up telling stories about the game and the land and how beautiful it was, and the abundance of things and how fertile the land was. And that piqued interest with a lot of the people who didn't have much land. They later in the late 1700s started a trend of migration from the east to the west into Appalachia.
It wasn't an easy life, right? Because whose land was it? Was it native land? Was it British land? Who owned the land? Turns out that most of the land was owned by British landowners, and they were very entrepreneurial about it. People think about the Wild West, right? And this is a time of people going out there. Appalachia was the first Wild West in many ways. There was a Wild West amongst the most amazing forests in the world. The forests we know today are nothing compared to what they were. And it was truly a place of grandeur and mystery and possibility this people were pouring in to. Daniel Boone's, for instance, his family had started off in Pennsylvania and moved down to the Yadkin Valley, through Virginia, into North Carolina. And then over the many, many decades that came through, he would slowly start looking into Kentucky along with many other people too. So when Kentucky opened, it was seen as this bounty. And it was a bounty. It was a bounty like none other. Coal was the power of everything. Kentucky was really the last place, eastern Kentucky, to have coal be mined. It was because there weren't railroads there. And it was because it could be more easily gotten in places like Indiana or in Pennsylvania. And the railroads were following into West Virginia. So it was really southern West Virginia and eastern Kentucky, which were kind of the last places. That came to be at the same time then that people kind of began thinking, well, what is Appalachia? What is this place? Who are these people? And these people, of course, were just ordinary Americans, but they got framed through the light of power and the desire for resources. And whenever you take somebody who has the resources and you have the power, you're not going to paint them in such a great portrayal. The coal industry would go on to be an incredibly important part of the economy, right? And people came in from all over the nation, from Alabama. They came, African Americans came because it was not happy in southern Alabama when you were living under Jim Crow. The stakes were up then, and this is the time of feuds, right? Feuds were about people fighting for resources. They were about this time of investment. They were about this time of figuring out, well, who is going to be in control of what's here and how? From
the late 1800s, early 1900s, there were feuds in Appalachia. That's the only thing that's remembered from that time period today by a lot of people. And a lot of it's because Appalachians didn't get to record their own history. There were actually newspaper writers and journalists from the Northeast and Midwest that actually came in and covered these feuds, and they embellished or exaggerated the truth and kept the feuds going longer than they actually did because it was selling newspapers. We see the Hatfields and McCoys is, of course, the most famous feud that most people know of and remember. They kept that feud going on for a couple of years past when it actually ended. You also had people that wrote dime novels, which were kind of like a cross between like a National Enquirer type publication and a comic book, if you will. And they ended up writing a lot about the Feuds, in which they embellished and exaggerated the truth. And that's really what gave Appalachia its black eye that it still has not recovered from today.
That's when the framing of Appalachia gets shown as this negative thing, right? These people without educations, these people who are violent, not people who were informed. But again, it was about this portrayal from the outside, from the great North then, that somehow people were uneducated. They needed help. And that's also because that's where the money came from. We get into the 1920s then, and that's when really coal's taking off. The number of deaths take off. People fought for dignity and they fought for their rights. One kind of dignity they could not gain, though, was after World War II, and there was a massive change. One of these massive changes was about the mechanization of the coal mines. And millions upon millions of people lost their jobs because they didn't need those jobs anymore. U.S. still needed coal. Coal levels have always gone up until really about 2015, but the number of miners have always gone down.
People that were living here didn't know what they were sitting on. So the people that owned these coal companies realized that they could buy their land for pretty cheap. So they would give someone $1,000 for the mineral rights of their property. Well, $1,000, that was huge money to them, huge money. They had no idea that they were sitting on millions and millions of dollars of coal right under their houses, right by their houses. So these coal companies kind of took advantage of the people here. They had really great paying jobs. They built houses for people, but you only stayed in your community. You couldn't really go much farther. So a lot of people stayed here, and the coal companies realized, hey, we can open our own stores, our own doctor's offices, things like that, and keep them in this area. And instead of paying them with real money, they paid them in what's called scrip. So scrip is 3/5 of a normal dollar, but anything that you wanted from the local store at the coal company stores, you can buy with scrip, or you go to the doctor, pay him in scrip, things like that. And then once the coal companies left, you couldn't use a scrip anywhere else. So then people would have to turn it in, obviously, to the bank and get 3/5 of what they originally made. They didn't have the wealth to pass on to their family, and so they were just stuck in this cycle. And anyone that's in that cycle, it's hard to break. I think that's a part of why you see so much poverty in this area, because they were great paying jobs. And so when they had to shut down, that took a huge toll on the economy in this area. And a lot of them couldn't work anywhere else, and they had to either get on disability or sadly move away to try to find that same type of paying job, which we don't have around here.
This gets us to the war on poverty. War on poverty wasn't about Appalachia, it was about the nation. The nation was aware of the dramatic changes between wealth after World War II. Appalachia then somehow caught the mind of people. There were a lot of people inside of Appalachia working. They knew they needed resources. Was there poverty? Yes, there was. There was need there too. So it's like good intentions, but with difficult effects. So that's where the amplifying the previous thinking about Appalachia really comes to light then. And these images that were in Life magazine and all over the place.
The war on poverty in the 1960s brought more recognition to Appalachia, and it showed the adverse poverty that existed here and showed some of the things that were needed and that were not available here. And it's kind of a double-edged sword where it brought recognition, the media in, but also some of the negative side that stems from that, which some of the stereotyping continued that had started earlier. There's so many stereotypes, from being ignorant and backward and violent. There's just so many negative things, and there's so much poverty here as it is already, and there are a lack of a lot of infrastructure and things that you hate to see the people start off, with like a weight tied around them because of some stereotype that's based on fiction. And it's really a shame that Appalachians have to face that. And there's so many people that are good people in the world today and in our country that actually believe those stereotypes because they don't know any better.
Oh, I work hard to debunk the stereotypes that we're ignorant, that we run around barefooted. Sometimes I'll go to a school in a city and they want to know what, they'll say, what do the kids there wear? Like clothes? just like you. They look just like you. And I'll get calls sometimes, want me to come and do some work. And they'll say, well, how do you dress? What do you wear? And I'm like, clothes. And, they'd be like, well, do you wear a bonnet? High-bibbed overalls? And no. I'm like, they probably want somebody else because I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to perpetuate this stereotype. They're like, do you have outside toilets? What kind of schools? All this kind of stuff, and it's not that way. It's not. But yeah, the stereotypes, no, I'm not playing that game. And I will set them straight.
Father Ralph Biding was a Catholic priest from northern Kentucky of German descent, and the diocese sent him to eastern Kentucky, late 40s, early 50s, and he was the pastor near Berea. And when Father came to Appalachia, he saw that there was a lot of need, there was a lot of poverty, and he wanted to try to do something about it. And at first, what he did was during the week, he would take his car back home to northern Kentucky, and with some of his family and friends giving donations of food and clothing and supplies, he'd bring them back in his car, and he would distribute out of the trunk of his car and the backseat of his car, those items to those in need. And that's kind of the way the CAP programming got started, was through the basic needs that he was meeting by doing outreach out of the back of his car. And after a while, I think Father saw that he was providing a service, but it was something he had to just keep doing, and he looked at making more of an impact long term. Father saw that the youth were a way in which he could make that happen. So summer camps were one of the first programs that Father actually started. That's kind of how CAP got its beginnings. It was incorporated in 1964. When CAP was being formed and Father was putting it together, he tried to choose a name that told who we were and what we did.
By 1962, there was a real demand that I do something. And so I began to think, what will I call this? I wanted Christ in it because he was the most essential ingredient of it all. And I knew I couldn't come up with a Catholic institution, so I said, well, Christian. That's my first rock to build on. Appalachia, because that's where I lived. That's where the kids were coming from, the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Kentucky and stretching beyond them into many of the other mountain states. And then I thought, well, what will we call it? Christian Appalachian what? I didn't want it to be a study group. I didn't want it to be a political group. I didn't want it to be some kind of domineering group. And I said, it's going to be a project. It's going to be work. It's going to be that you're going to have to get out and wade those creeks and climb those hills and get your feet wet and your hands dirty. You're going to work. And that's what I came up with, Christian Appalachian Project.
Of course, Father Biding was the founder of CAP, and he was instrumental in starting the programs in CAP early on and bringing the volunteers, and he basically molded who we are. And he moved from the western section of CAP in eastern Kentucky further to the east in the 1980s, and he brought some of that programming with him. And through the years, we've seen those programs evolve. And eventually, Father got to the point where I think he wanted to make sure that CAP could survive on its own without his influence, and so he kind of stepped away from CAP a little bit while still providing some support and checking on things and how they went. But I think Father foresaw that one day he would be gone, and he wanted to ensure that CAP continued on serving people in need in Appalachia, which we have. Even though Father is an intricate part of who we are and the formation of CAP, we have gone beyond that time period of a Father now, and we're continuing the work that he started many years ago. CAP was here before the War on Poverty actually kicked off, and we were actually providing services to people in need. If there's one thing that may have come from the War on Poverty that affected CAP, it may have been the increase in volunteers that ended up coming to CAP. But even after the War on Poverty ended, CAP, of course, is still here meeting those needs of people in poverty here in Appalachia.
There was still a lot of need. There were a lot of one-room schoolhouses. As Father Biding discovered, there were people willing to help, but how are we going to do that? And this is where common people came in. It's this work of involving people and helping people be cared for and connected both within the community and without. One of the great wealths, I think, of the Christian Appalachian Project is also the people who are not from the region who have come here. And I know person after person for whom this is a home for them and feel at home and have been welcomed at home. At the same time that they were helping people for whom it was already home and working hand in hand with them to create a sense of greater connection.
There is poverty, but I don't like people just looking at us and just that's one thing they think of. So what do you do about that? Just from the bottom up, let's start lifting people up and acquiring the means to rise up out of abject poverty. And the Christian Appalachian Project does that, I'm telling you. It's awesome what they do. If you help one another, and that's what it is, you help one another, and if you have the means to help, then help, because that's going to enable them to help.
Some people say that Appalachians are too proud to ask for help, and in some instances that's true. I think that part of that probably goes back to our past and our history, in which we were kind of rugged individualists and we were self-sufficient. We grew or raised or made whatever we needed and bartered or traded for those things that we didn't have. And I think that through the years, there was some dependency that came out of, in particular, coal mining, and then later some, different types of programs to help assist people. So you have some people that have like a work ethic to them, that they feel as though they're to ask for something without paying for it or working for it is a bad thing, and so it hurts their pride to try to do that.
I do think we need more opportunity to work in our own communities, building up our own community in a way to where people don't have to move away to work, and bringing value, not exploitation, because we've been exploited. Our land has been exploited, and it has been ravaged. When you want to support your family and you love where you are, you will work at what is offered. And a lot of times you are not treated fairly and not paid the way you should be, and denied benefits. And it's kind of like, well, you don't have a choice because you need your job. And I'm speaking from experience. And it's moving that way in our young people, to start taking pride in what we have here and taking care of it ourselves, and not allowing ourselves to be exploited, but to stand up for our rights. To me, what matters is the land and the people and the love we have for nature.
I think that many Americans are caught in the commodity relationship with place, buying and moving and selling. It's a real barren desert in many people's hearts. If it's a consumer relationship, I can move that a lot more easy, right? I can change that, I can go anywhere. But to have a deep relationship with a place where generations of my family have walked through, the trees that my great-great-grandfather has planted, that is not a commodity relationship, right? That's a deeply interwoven, I would call it spiritual relationship, right? Because I just don't have another word for its reality and truth and richness beyond that. And you can't buy that in a store.
Appalachia today is vanishing. The culture, the land, it's not even the way when I grew up, and that makes me sad. Our language, our dialect, I'm proud of. And many people still retain that have grew up here and stay here. But so many people are leaving. They leave for somewhere else, and it's changing. It's just changing, and it's not changing for the better, I don't think. hopefully the young people, some of them are reclaiming their pride and their land, and they're going back to the old ways of taking care of what you have, because what we have is beautiful. So I shouldn't really feel all that bad, because we do have a movement of young people who are, like, let's preserve this, let's stay here. Let's do whatever we're going to do if you want to get an education, but let's bring these skills back into our place and make this place better.
I know that there's some people that think sometimes that there's just one solution to the problems in Appalachia. I've heard people say that education is the solution. And education is a great thing, and it's very needed in Appalachia as it is in other parts of the country. But it's not the only solution, because if you educate a young person and they don't have a job to come back home to, then they either end up unemployed or in a job that doesn't match their employment, or they have to leave the area. And then you've helped the person, but not necessarily the region. So that's a challenge that we see in Appalachia's good jobs. But people, like I said, are connected to the land and to their families and to their past. And that keeps people here, And I think that sometimes we forget that every region of the country has its negatives and its positives.
I think the people stay now because we want to preserve our culture and our place. We're a part of the land. I mean, I'm a part of this land. To take me away, I'd always want to come back. So I think they stay because you don't leave your family. You always want to come back to your family. In this land, we've walked it, and our ancestors have walked it. So that's why we want to stay. It's what we know, and we're a part of the earth. That's how a lot of us feel that way. We're a part of the soil and the trees and the rocks, the mountains. We embrace that. You're whole. And when you're taken away from that, you're lost. So yeah, we stay.
Many of us that work here are Appalachians ourselves as well, which is pretty neat in a way, because we have people that are from away from here and people from Appalachia that come together to kind of blend that special sauce of providing services to people in need here. We see people from different walks of life in Appalachia that we serve. We see people that definitely need hope, and we're interested, of course, in helping to transform their lives and share Christ's love through service in Appalachia. We see people that have varying needs that can be impoverished, and we see people there's middle-income people. I mean, Appalachia is similar to other parts of the country, but yet it's different as well. We see that the mountains and the closeness of family and being tied to the land is something that is rather unique in Appalachia. But we also face some of the same difficulties that the rest of the country does as well. We see the problems with substance abuse, and we see problems in different types of things that you see in other areas. But there's not as many resources here in Appalachia as there is outside. And one of the neat things that CAP does is we may not provide all the services that they need, but we also act as a referral source, and we also put them in touch with others that can help them. And sometimes if we see trends begin, we change our programming so that we can meet those needs. And we also have food programs for those that need food, and we also do home repair, counseling. We have elderly program, we have youth empowerment services that we work with children, child development centers. So we have a wide array of programming to help those in need in Appalachia.